Mr. Chair, thank you very much. There's two sides to this bill. One is the apprenticeship side and the other is the industry training side. So just to be clear, some of the rhetoric that has gone on in the House today has made it sound as if when young people are in industry training, and actually I'd take that back, it's not just young people, and it's one of the positives inside the bill. So one of the positives inside the bill is that the same amount of support will be provided to all apprentices. So we're pleased to see the ageism around apprenticeships being taken away. But though young people inside industry training also gain a debt. They also have to pay a certain amount inside to gain the industry training, whether that be in hairdressing or building or whatever. The ITOs, their services, while subsidised by the state, are not 100% free. So that needs to be made clear, because it sounds as if this is, this is all just an argument about a government gift, and it's not an argument about a government gift. Some of the changes that were made to the ITOs previously, and this is the end of a long period of change for the ITOs, was around minimising the ITOs, getting some clarity for both employers and young people inside apprenticeships and industry training and their families, that the qualifications they were gaining had value, that they had value out there in the marketplace across the board. And therein lies one of the major concerns about this, this shift, or the proposal inside this bill to hand industry training money to business, because that is a complete contradiction to the controls around making sure that we can quantifiably say that the qualifications that those young people gain, or those apprentices and industry training individuals gain, are quality. We start to lose that ability to truly say they are quality, because as my colleagues from the Labour Party said, there is a lower criteria, a lower threshold for those businesses that's been, it's relatively silent actually with regard to those criteria. Now, it is very, very interesting that none of the proponents for this, for the ability for industry to be funded in this way, came to submit. Not one. And one has to ask yourself, why is that? Is that because actually it's not that important? Or is it because actually they knew they didn't have to? Is it because they already knew it was going through anyway, and that it didn't matter whether it was supported or not, that the government was just going to put it through? Why did industry then not bring their voice and add the reasons why they wanted it? Because not a single one did. So you have to ask yourself then, if nobody came and asked for it, why is it still here? Why, when actually most of the submitters said this is a problem and we don't recommend it, this is of a concern to us, did the members of the National Party on the Select Committee just shrug their shoulders and say, oh, well, why not? There's never been any argument put forward by the government members of the Select Committee as to why this needs to be there. It did come out of a review, absolutely, as did many other steps that have been taken. But there was no support inside the submissions, and yet it was just to shrug your shoulders, oh, well, never mind, we'll do it, which is exactly the same response that the government members on the Select Committee had with charter schools. Oh, well, why not? And New Zealand First is not confident that that's a good way to create legislation. Well, why not? Let's just do it anyway, whether we need it or not. Let's do it anyway, whether industry wants it or not. So we're in a dilemma around that. The Minister and the Chair might be able to answer it, or perhaps one of the members of the Select Committee from the government benches could stand and answer that question. Why exactly is it still in the bill? Because to date they haven't been able to answer that. I think it's very interesting that the comments that Nick Smith made with regard to apprenticeships and industry training and so on and so forth. He gave the impression actually that the opposition is opposing the bill because it doesn't like any money to go into private training providers. And obviously, anybody who has spoken to any of the opposition members, and believe me, many people inside education are speaking to the opposition members as we move towards the election date, they will know that the PTEs are strongly supported by the opposition parties, and that there is much discussion going on around their role inside training, Mr Chair. Mr Chair. So just to make sure that little soundbite from the Minister doesn't just stay out there in the ether, because that's certainly not the case. And I think the other point that New Zealand First would like to make with regard to this particular bill is probably the lost opportunity here. There's continual contradictions with the national government in the way it deals with anything to do with education, actually. So in this bill, on the one hand, you have a large subsidy for industry or businesses if they wanted to tap into the education dollar and train people specifically for their specific industry, as opposed to, on the other hand, the government supporting vocational pathways, supporting that there should be a generalised education pathway towards the vocations, and that should be wide, so that people, young people inside this sort of training can change through companies as we go forward, because we all know that the whole area of employment is going to change, and we cannot pick winners and losers inside this environment as we move forward into the 21st century. But the other thing that happened with, on the one hand here, we've got this subsidy for large business now being written into the bill, and at the same time, small and medium-sized business, and we've heard it before, small and medium-sized business still has a financial barrier to taking on apprentices. A hairdresser, for example, that wants to take on an apprentice has to pay $500 a year. $500 a year for every year that their hairdressing apprentice wants to be there. How do small and medium-sized businesses inside rural communities who want to participate with the educational advancement of their young people and educational and economic development of their areas, it may not sound like much, but to a single hairdresser who works in a sole chair outlet in their small town, who wants to support a young person into industry training or apprenticeship, how do they cover that fee? And it would be our suggestion that there was an opportunity inside this bill, rather than subsidising big business, to actually take away some of the financial barriers to small and medium-sized business, so that they can support their communities. And the government will argue that they should have skin in the game. The industries do have skin inside the game. The industries have skin inside the game on the boards of the ITOs, and in the setting of the direction around the skills, which comes now to the setting of the skills standards and the removal of anybody's name to be responsible for it. If there's nobody responsible, to whom is the government going to hold accountable? If there's nobody's name on that job, who is the government going to hold accountable? Because at the end of the day, somebody's going to do it. But if nobody's identified as that somebody, you can't hold them accountable. You can't take their funding. You can't say they should have done it. You can't do anything. You have to put a name on it, and then through accountability measures, you make them responsible. So you might have picked up, Mr Chair, that New Zealand First will not be supporting the bill. There are some very smart things inside this bill, and it's a shame that the two things, and New Zealand First will be supporting David Clendon's SOP. We ask that the government consider supporting them also, and then there would be agreement across the House. They are the two small yet very important things inside this bill that New Zealand First cannot support.
Carol Beaumont.
Very much, Mr Chair. Mr Chair, like my colleagues, I'm rising to speak in opposition to this industry training and apprenticeships amendment bill, and I have